Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today for the National Engineering Month's focus on engineers as emerging leaders. Thank you for joining today. I'm just trying to get, there we go. So as many of you have seen in the notice and the outline from the National Engineering Management site, today we're going to focus on the building blocks of the results IT factor, and we'll talk about how engineers influence results. We will also look at some of the core skills and behaviors of engineers and how they may inform your decisions around your own leadership and management development. So my name is Pierre Lebel. I'm the Chief Results Officer for Results Consulting and also the Results Academy. And we work very closely with OSPE, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, with the Ontario Engineering Academy and a variety of other educational institutions. And I've been around the block for many, many years. I'm a performance expert, and I help organizations and leaders perform better. Just to give you a little bit of context in terms of my understanding and appreciation of engineers, my wife is an engineer, my father-in-law is an engineer, my son is an engineer, my two brother-in-laws are engineers, and I've been working with engineers for over 20 years. So I've learned a thing or two about engineers and how to have discussions with them. It's a little bit challenging, but I figured out the logic in terms of winning that battle. Anyway, so emerging leaders which is what we're talking about today, are smart, talented, high achievers in their current roles, and they consistently produce more and better work than their peers, are often considered subject matter experts, and know how to attain results by their own accord or through others. And lastly, they are driven to accomplish great things. So today, we will quickly cover off what we will be addressing today. So we'll talk a little bit about what is an emerging leader. We'll address how engineers transform our world, how great engineers have commonality. We'll introduce Google's 10 management behaviors related to engineering and management. We will quickly cover off the results IT factor and how that applies to you. And then we will simply talk about the OSPE's Emerging Leadership Program. Okay, so quickly, engineers transform our world. And for most of us in the know, there should be no surprise that people who've studied engineering and business account for almost 44% of the Fortune 500 companies. Yes, and that's almost half of all the CEOs in the Fortune 500 index of companies. So for the millennia, engineers have been envisioning, planning, building, and maintaining many of the greatest innovations since humankind. And for thousands of years, individuals with engineering mindsets have built some of the greatest structures of personkind. So for example, the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Great Wall of China, pyramids in Mexico, the Colosseum in Rome, development of flight and aircraft, the Eiffel Tower, the Statue of Liberty, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, and the modern day computer. This is just a quick sample of one of the very first computers developed and commercialized. And lastly, for example, the CN Tower in Toronto. So one point I want to make is that there are more top performing CEOs than there are that have engineering degrees than MBAs. And these four individuals here, Corinne Yu, Gwynne Shotwell, Alicia Bowler, and Alyssa Murphy, are some of the most recognized, talented individuals who are CEOs and also have engineering degrees. And you may recognize some of these individuals here who are also engineers who run companies. Now, Jeffrey Sprecher, who's the founder and chairman of the International Exchange and also the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, who's also an engineer, once said, "Engineering taught me about problem solving and complex systems and the way things relate to each other. And business is really just that. So engineers really are focused on solving problems, big or small. And for engineers who move up through the ranks and out of engineering into the corporate world or in the business, they have developed acute critical thinking skills, business know-how, planning, projecting, analysis. All those skill sets make a big difference. And again, these are some of the greatest engineers in our time. And great engineers have a number of things in common. So first of all, engineers are known to be team players, and teamwork drives the successful completion of projects, because essentially no one really finishes a project on their own, and they need others to contribute. Great engineers also have a desire for continuous learning. Technology and methodologies are constantly changing, and staying up to date with the latest developments puts engineers ahead of the field. Engineers are known to be creative. Some of you may be surprised by that, but and some of you might think that this is a cliche, but successful engineers have an innate ability to think outside the box. They look for creative opportunities to solve problems that may not necessarily just be evident. Great engineers are fantastic at problem solving. Any project, no matter how big or small, will face problems, and the engineer must be able to effectively address these as they occur. Analytical ability. This is not surprising to all of you. Engineers are required to think analytically in order to fully define a problem and develop solutions suited to that problem. Communication skills. For an engineer, communication means the ability to not only understand technical complexities, but the ability to succinctly and effectively translate technical jargon into layperson's terms. This is one of the areas that I've heard time and time again around engineers, new engineers, EITs, etc., coming out of the academic world with great analytical skills, with great problem-solving skills. However, we hear time and time again that engineers face some struggles around communication. Now, how big is that a problem? I don't know, but I continue to hear that as an issue. In terms of great engineers, in terms of skill sets, I would say logical thinking rules the day for them. They must know how the systems work and what can go wrong and how to fix it. Great engineers pay attention to detail, and that is critical. There are many, many situations where we've seen some kind of design, engineering design, whether it be a bridge or, for example, the Espanola mall incident where the ceiling collapsed under heavy snow. In those cases where there has been a catastrophic event or situation where the engineering design failed, it's oftentimes because of the attention to detail. Mathematical ability. Engineers need to have outstanding math skills. And lastly, successful engineers also need well-developed soft skills so that they can perform non-technical duties. I'm just going to look at the chats here. So don't hesitate to ask a question from the chat sessions. Okay, just moving forward. So leadership is a really great topic to talk about today. And it is also an issue that sometimes prevents engineers from moving up in their career ladders. Communication and leadership skills are essential. Now, Google has defined 10 manager behaviors, and they've outlined what it takes to be a great manager. When Google did this, they did it because a lot of technical individuals in the Google organization were indicating that management wasn't necessary, that the company could be run effectively simply by having technical people. And when they first did this project called Project Oxygen, they realized that technical people also appreciate management, but management with these 10 core management behaviors. The first is a good coach. So technical people and engineers, and for most part, individuals at Google who did, thousands of hours of research based on all the analytics Google has done. One of the key management behaviors is an individual has to be a good coach. And that means understanding their environment, understanding the issues, understanding the need of the individual or team, and listening and sharing, and having to do that through good communication and insight, and using their judgment, and to help others perform better, whether it's in their team, project team, or an intact team. The second one is managers need to empower their team and not to micromanage. We sometimes experience through the work that we do in coaching that many engineers, because of their analytical skills, their focus on details, oftentimes are perceived to micromanage others. And it's not intended for the most part to micromanage people. It's intended to have those checks and controls in place, and to assure themselves, and perhaps their boss or even their customer, that it's the little things that are not going to get in the way. The third is engineers or technical people who need to demonstrate great management skills need to create an inclusive environment showing concern. With the world changing as it is, with the demography changing as we continue to live our lives, with the increasing number of students coming from other countries, that brings a whole host of issues around inclusivity, respect, and a sense of belonging. And one of the challenges that engineers have, or even managers in the workplace, is to create that environment that is inclusive, where everybody belongs, showing concern for their needs, and working through any issues or dynamics that come up for that individual. The fourth is having a productive and results-oriented organization and culture, and the manager herself or himself is demonstrating that they too are also productive and results-oriented. Individuals with great management skills lead the way, and it delves into the area of leadership. However, good managers managing people, teams, functions, and processes need to demonstrate that they too are productive and results-oriented, and that oftentimes impacts on an individual or team's view of the world that they work in and the suitability of the manager. The fifth key area of management behavior centers around communication, and that the manager needs to communicate well, listens and shares information, and so forth. And by the way, at the end of this overview, we will leave 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers. And in the interim, what you could do is put some of those questions into the chat bar. Thank you. The sixth key area is supporting career development and talks about performance. It never ceases to amaze me how a lot of organizations get so busy on meeting the day-to-day needs that they sometimes forget that the organization is run by people and not things, not tangible assets that are, physical in nature, like buildings or machinery or whatever it may be, computers. Organizations are run by people, and we need to make sure that those individuals at all levels of the organization actually have opportunities for development and discussions around how they indeed are performing. The single greatest performance lever in all organizations today around the world is where an employee or worker feels as if their manager cares about them and provides them ongoing feedback and discusses how their work contributes to the big picture. So if an employee, team member, worker understands how their role supports the biggest picture and how well they are doing or not, and getting, real-time feedback, that essentially empowers and equips individuals to perform well. The seventh management behavior that Google focused on was managers need to have a clear vision and strategy for the team. This doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be a strategist, a business strategist, but they do need to have a sense of what is that team and what is he or she or they are working towards. What's the bigger picture? What are they trying to solve through the engineering or the technical function that they are in, and how they are going to do it, because strategy is all about the how. So great managers articulate a good vision or a clear vision and actually work out the details of executing that strategy. The seventh area is the manager, him or herself, has key technical skills to help advise the team. So when engineers or technical individuals or individuals in technical roles, any role in STEM, for instance, they have a problem, they need to go to somebody who is an expert in that area, or refer them to a subject matter expert who can help them more immediately. The next behavior is collaborating across the organization. I can't say enough about this notion of collaboration. We will introduce to you the results it factor, which ultimately relates to how trust of individuals and teams creates a sense of belonging and a sense of collaboration. But that collaboration has to be up and down the organization and across the organization. So for example, I and my colleagues recently have been working with a very large, multinational global organization. And we work for many companies like that, by the way, and smaller organizations as well. But it never ceases to disappoint me when I see a lot of silo thinking, a lot of silo work, not knowing the dependencies between their organization and another internal organization and how they perhaps can help each other. And this is one of the things that we push organizations to do, is to make sure they have a clear strategy. But on the execution side, meaning getting the work done as per plan, they need to collaborate in ways so that they're maximizing the tools, the energy, the people resources, the financial assets, etc., in a way that everyone wins. But collaboration is key. And the last management behavior that the Project Oxygen focused on and identified is the manager needs to be a strong decision maker. When we do coaching, for example, of leaders, one of the concerns that comes out of that process through that managers, either their peers, their subordinates, or even their boss, sometimes that feedback comes back is that they sit on an issue perhaps too long and fails to make a decision in a meaningful way or in a timely way, or both. And that has a significant impact on not only getting to the desired results that they want, but the timing of that. And through that, employees get frustrated. So if they don't understand why there is a delay or the hesitation of the manager, that will really impact on everybody's morale. So that's something that we need to focus on. So just paraphrasing, the top 10 manager behaviors identified by Google is a good coach, empowers team and doesn't micromanage, ensure there's a inclusive and a sense of belonging, is productive and results oriented themselves, communicates well, listens and shares information, supports their own and others' career development and talks about performance, has a clear vision for the future, is there to be available for engineers or people in technical roles for help, collaborating across the organization, and is also a strong decision maker. So these 10 management behaviors are influencing how organizations today are impacting, values. What are the values of the organization or the employees? And therefore, based on those values, what are the expected behaviors? So the question is, where do you learn these behaviors? Where do you experience them? How do you go about skilling yourself, whether or not you're an engineer in training, in a new role, or a mid-level career engineer? The question is, where do you learn this stuff if you're just new in your career or want to be a manager? Well, unfortunately, you're not going to get a lot of that through university or colleges. You may look at some management skills, best practices through maybe case studies and so forth, or maybe even in some courses. I know in some engineering courses, or engineering degrees, that they are blended with human resources management curriculum. So in those cases, they do learn a little bit about management best practices, but typically universities are not typically focused on that. So I'm going to introduce to you the results it factor. And this is a methodology that myself and one of my colleagues, her name is Monique Armstrong, developed a number of years ago. And it really speaks to the it factor. And I'll explain what that means. And when we work with organizations and leaders, we go back to the it factor and ask ourselves, okay, does that person or that team fit this model? And if so, great. And in that scenario, we ask ourselves, could that person do that better? In cases where the individual or team fail at demonstrating the behaviors aligned to the it factor, we will help them develop the skills or provide coaching and support to that individual or team to help them be more effective as both an individual contributor and a manager. So what does that look like? So the it factor stands for intention, interaction, insight leading to trust. And we say we dot our I's to cross the T. So there are 3 I's. The first is intention, which is, what is that individual, team's, or organization's aim or plan? What's its motive? Okay. And interaction is how one person interacts with another or with a team. And lastly, what is the insight or impact gained from a deep understanding of that person? Now, to give you an example, if an organization has value sets that says something like a team player is communicative, can be trusted, et cetera, and the individual in the job has a role description that says you need to do these things as well as a manager. But if that individual's interaction, their behavior, which sits under the interaction element there, if their behavior is incongruent to what is expected of the company or them in the role, guess what happens? People and others have insight and experience, which relates to impact. And some of that insight and impact leads to distrust, okay? And with distrust, it's a key disabler in organizations today. And we'll talk about how that works and some of the pros and cons for that. So again, the IT factor stands for intent, interact, insight, leading to trust. So dot our I's and cross the T. So how that looks like, this is just a simple visual and a metaphor for the blue representing the ocean, okay? And what's below the ocean line, like in human nature, what's in our head, is things such as intent, our motive, what's driving us to behave a certain way. And the white represents what's above the waterline. So when you think of an iceberg, okay, the bottom part, we say, really fits the IT factor model. So intent plus insight, plus interaction and insight leading to trust. And that becomes the foundation. If a manager or leader does not have the trust that they require in their role, no one's going to follow them. So leadership is about trust, is about helping others to do their very best through followership, coaching, whatever it may be. So above the waterline, we see, or what we see as human beings, the person's behavior and whether or not they collaborate with others. And that is just above trust. If there is no trust, there's no collaboration. But if there's trust, people and teams are more likely to collaborate with each other and perform better. So how does that work in terms of all the elements leading to what we call our performance pyramid? And essentially, at the end of the day, the engineer, the individual in the technical role, the manager, the team, the organization really needs to achieve the right results. And the right results could be what's expected of you as a manager, your job description, your role accountabilities, or what's the technical requirements of your job in your role description, and what does success look like for you or your team? That's anchored against strategy and the business plan for the organization. And when you look at bottom up, okay, collaboration builds commitment. Okay, we always say, and in fact, we always do this in a learning session. We get people to work together so that they learn about each other. And that collaboration tends to build trust and commitment to get the exercise done. Same thing applies in the workplace. If individuals are trusting, they're collaborating, they're more apt to be committed to the team and to others and the work as well. Factoring in capability, technical skills, professional skills, management best practices kind of fit into this category. So collaboration, commitment, plus capability, the right capability to get to the right results with the right kind of accountability or an accountable culture, and that the individual is actually in the right role. All those elements leading upwards, which is like above the pyramid or above, the waterline with the iceberg, you want to be able to see the highest order outcome, okay? Now, you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow said, the very top of the pyramid is all about self-actualization. And so when good organizations focus on employees and developing those employees, one of the things they focus on is not just how they're behaving, but what are the skills and what are the career paths for these individuals? And that also forms the right results. Now, when you're thinking about this metaphor, just think of, the story of the Titanic, okay? So the Titanic hit this iceberg, okay, and it didn't really see it coming, and it was too late. And so when that Titanic hit the iceberg, for instance, huge devastation, okay? And here, over time, the Titanic sunk and many people died. I think something like 1,200 people died. The metaphor for you is you could be a great technical expert. You could be the subject matter expert, but if your behavior is not congruent with the values of the organization or the team, or what's expected of you as a leader to behave a certain way, there will be that collision. And we've oftentimes heard people are hired for their technical skills and people are fired for their behavior. And I see that time and time again. My background, by the way, is I've worked literally around the world, helping organizations develop strategy, business plans, creating leadership programs, coaching executives up to the CEO level, and also helping them build a pathway so that the environment is suitable for career development. But we also suggest to organizations when they look at development needs for employees, that they look at their capability and whether or not they are in the right role. So that's something that is important to ultimately get to the right results. So again, going back to the IT factor, it does and is applicable to you, to engineers and also individuals working in technical positions, because your job may expect you, which is the intent, to develop blueprints or come up with a new design or solve a problem. That's been made clear to you. That's the intent, that's the goal. You may go about, interacting with others, partners, team members, maybe even customers, to actually, help solve that problem, to incubate ideas, options, and ultimately solve it. And the insight from that experience or impact, is that you get the job done. But if you go about doing it, which is really your interaction, guess what? Nobody's going to love you. Nobody's even going to like you. And when that happens, the impact or the insight is that person is an idiot. Okay, I'm not working with them. And that does impact on trust and achievement of the right results. So you too, this applies to you. So the question is now what? What do engineers in training or engineers in current roles that want to progress to a management or leadership position? The question is, how are you going to get that? Well, for some of you, you may recognize this, that OSPI provides an emerging leadership program. And as you can see, it's on their homepage. And when you click on Learn More, you'll find all kinds of information around what is the Emerging Leadership Certificate Program. And there are a number of learning outcomes. We're not going to go through all of them because of time today, but the key is to equip individuals in their roles or their future roles to understand business opportunities and risk and learn how to make choices, develop the right kind of tools, and advance yourself. Through this program, we will help you understand and adapt to leadership and management trends. What are the issues out there in terms of leadership? For example, workers working from home. How is that going to actually work from a leadership perspective in terms of motivating employees, teams, keeping them focused, and so forth? And through the program as well, we will also help you develop your own authentic leadership style and understand how to rally around the complex intersection of business demand, customers, and competitive pressures. And you can see here, there are a number of other learning outcomes. Pragmatically, individuals in the program will have an expert facilitator for the program itself, for the individuals. It runs 3 months. Each program runs 3 months. It's 12 weeks long, with 10 actual sessions. Each session is 2 to 3 hours long, where that session will focus on new insights, new skills, management issues or leadership issues, and what is the thinking around them? What are the best practices? What are the approaches? And what you can actually do to learn and grow at these new skills or way to lead others. So it's 12 weeks long, 10 weeks of active learning. That active learning comes from your development plan, because as a participant, you will also have access to an assessment on your leadership style and management style. And if you aren't a manager, that's fine. It will assess your leadership style. And there's a 360-degree format availability for this. And so that means you could ask others to give you feedback. And it's all done confidentially, and it's administered all online in 60 different languages. And it's one of the best leadership and management assessment instruments out there. And frankly, we're really thrilled that OSPI has been able to create a partnership around utilizing those tools. You'll also have a coach. So you get 3 1-hour coaching sessions. You'll meet and work with individuals in the program and form small teams. There will be some pre-reading, maybe a little bit of homework from session to session. And the dialogue and your own development will be anchored back to your assessment and a development plan that you will create. So in the first coaching session you'll be working with the advisor to actually fine-tune a draft of your development plan. So think about your objectives as a leader, or your objectives as a manager, or even your life objectives, which may include your career objectives. So what are those objectives that you need to focus on in the next year, maybe anchored to the next 2 or 3 years, and maybe to when you retire. So what's the roadmap? What's the plan? And once you identify some of those objectives, then we walk backwards and say, okay, what can you learn not only during this 3-month program, but over the span of your career? And so we'll isolate that with you and coach you around that. Now, because the program is only 3 months long, you will still take that development plan and what you've learned from that assessment forward so that you can, continue to focus on your career development. And you will get a certificate of completion. And for those people who are non-members of the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, you will have the ability to get 1 year's free of membership. So for more information, go to the OSPI website for that. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that you have a better competitive advantage, which means better skills, better knowledge, better know-how, the ability to be able to sell yourself effectively, communicate effectively, lead and manage teams. And ultimately, through that, you're going to, rise through your career and make more money and be more valuable to the profession and to business, so you can have a better lifestyle at the end of the day and help the community solve problems. So at the end of the day, all of this is about creating a competitive advantage for you and perhaps individuals in your organization. So just to close quickly, the first program is running from April the 20th to June the 29th. It's 1 week, one session per week. It runs from 9 a.m. to about 12 noon. If we're finding that that time frame is not suitable to some or most of you who join or others, participants who join, we will recalibrate the time. We do a lot of education, learning, etc. in the evenings around people's availability. So we will be somewhat flexible. The reason why we say 10 sessions versus 12 weeks is that the first session will start, we will get you going on the assessment, and then with any 360 leadership feedback, we need a bit of time to look at that and provide you with some feedback and some insight before you actually get your full it's quite a thick document that looks at your assessments of leadership and so forth. So that's essentially it. I'm happy to answer any questions around leadership or management issues for which I'm comfortable answering. I do this for a living. Like I said, I'm a performance expert in organizations and teams. And part of my organization also helps organizations such as OSPI develop leadership and management programs. OSPI wants to signify the important role of the partners. And as you can see here, there are a number of levels of partners: leader, champion, ally, and advocate. So thank you to all these organizations for making the National Engineering Month a viable, interesting, and valuable process and month of learning. So thank you. At the bottom are at the bottom of this page, you'll see my name and my email address. Feel free to send me questions. I'll be happy to answer them for you. So at this stage, I'll entertain any questions that you might have. I see there are a number of statements in the chat box. Let me just scroll through them. And feel free to put your audio on to ask me any question. I'm just going to go scroll through this quickly.
Here, this is Lisa. Just to jump in and let you know, I have direct messaged you a couple of things that I thought you might want to address.
Okay, I'm just looking at that, but I've learned that dangerous quality. I'm someone who gets stressed easily. Okay, somebody wrote, I'm someone who gets stressed easily, and I've learned that it's a dangerous quality in leadership. A stressed leader drags down the whole morale of the team. I would agree, one thing a leader needs to focus on, or a person in a leader or management role, they need to learn tools to calm their anxiety. And we actually help a lot of those leaders identify what are the triggers for their stress and anxiety, how to calm themselves and how to approach situations that are complex or difficult for them, and to provide them tools so that they can learn them, apply them, and over time become less stressed. So I appreciate the individual sharing that information with us. And yes, these things can be learned and applied. I'm just going to read here questions. What advice would you give to direct reports who report to such managers throughout their career? Let me read you the statement. My experience within engineering has shown that good engineers / workers simply get promoted into management by senior leadership, although the management skill set is vastly different than the engineering skill set. I totally agree with that. Typically, and it goes on in the chat, it says, typically, no formal training is provided to the staff that make this large leap within the organizational engineering firm, deeming it safe to actually do that role. I totally agree with you. And for those of you who are aspiring into a management position or a more senior management position, or a leadership position where it's formal or informal, one of the things you have to ask yourself, okay, is that job right for me? And what are the competencies, meaning the skills and experiences necessary for that role? And if the organization is not providing you with that training or the support to enable you to do that, that is unfortunate, but that happens far too many times in individuals' careers. That's why organizations such as OSPI and the Ontario Engineering Academy have developed a number of technical and non-technical and leadership and management skills courses at frankly, a cheap price that will help individuals such as yourself. Lisa sent me some questions or comments here. I'll try to read them here. Okay. This is probably, let me go back to this here. You might stop sharing your presentation so you can talk directly to the audience. Perfect. Okay, great. Let me see if there are any other questions. Anybody else have questions? Do most of you understand the results it factor as I've presented it? This is one of the challenges that we see, individuals who have technical backgrounds going into management roles, and they are so accustomed to be the technical expert, they don't truly understand what they don't know sometimes and how that impacts on their interaction with individuals in their team. And that's an unfortunate thing. So one thing that individuals moving into management roles or considering it, you really have to look at what are my skill sets and experiences to be able to manage. Maybe I did something in high school or university or college where I was singled out as a leader to help run a team or run a project. Some of those skill sets and experiences are very valuable and never discount them. But what additional knowledge and skills do you need to actually be effective in your role? I would do a self-inventory and then, identify those key areas that make a difference and, find venues or opportunities where you can learn that skill or get a coach or mentor or enhance your network. I see a question here. What advice would you give to people in teams where the team leader isn't embodying good leadership and the team needs to work around them to fill that leadership gap? Well, to be honest with you, this happens more than you think. And it's awful. It's an awful experience for the members of that team. And one of the things that oftentimes happens is when that continues to occur in an environment, people do complain, whether it's loudly, overtly, silently, but somehow that impact of their behavior gets out. And if it gets out strong enough, okay, and their boss hears it, then there's usually an intervention. That's my experience. But if there isn't that intervention or training for that individual, or even self-awareness, they're going to continue doing the same old, same old. And so you have some choices to make. Seek guidance from human resources, if there's a human resources person. If that behavior of that individual is offensive, derogatory, disrespectful, and the list goes on, that provides you with an opportunity to raise those issues with either colleagues to, identify whether or not they're experiencing the same thing. And if so, maybe you take it to HR. The other thing is if there's a team leader that's doing something inappropriate that infringes on your person, whether you feel unsafe or at risk for whatever reason, you have a responsibility to share that feedback with that person and not receive reprisal. If you've complained or talked to your direct manager about some of those things that are offensive and they turn around and fire you, that's reprisal, that's wrongful dismissal. It's a different story then. So it's difficult, but one of the things you have to ask yourself, what is the risk and opportunity by raising my hand and doing that? Good leaders, I've seen good leaders, I've seen bad leaders turn into good leaders when they are more self-aware and they work hard at reskilling themselves to do that. But again, if their motives, if their value system isn't aligned to the organization's values or the team's, you have to bring that forward, okay? Okay, Pierre, what are your thoughts on managing up in the situation of the poor team lead? Well, when I was in the corporate world, for a long time, and my background in the corporate world was I started off as a journalist, then worked in communications and organizations. Then I went into human resources management and became, for a number of organizations, the vice president or the senior vice president of human resources. Then I got into strategy, went into consulting, ran a few businesses and so forth. So I've got real hands-on experience with some of those things. So managing up is something that I always did. It's hard to go around your boss. Okay. So make sure you've got tangible evidence that's witnessed by others, if you can, and take that information and talk to that manager's manager if you can. Do that in a way that it's discreet and so forth. But you need to do that if in fact that team lead is horrible or underperforming. In the event that you do that, their boss will ask you questions such as, okay, tell me what you've seen or heard or what you experienced. And if it isn't attributed to somebody else seeing it or a list of complaints that you've written for yourself over time, that just weakens your case. So make sure that if you're going above that individual, that you're indicating what the problem is, how that impacts you, and what is the remedy? What would you look for from that leader? Okay, happy to answer any more questions through my email. Another question, my experience with incompetent or toxic leaders is that no matter how much you complain about them to HR, they never get fired. Well, in your organization or the organizations you have been in, yeah, sometimes that may have happened and it's rather unfortunate. But if there are a number of complaints, honestly, in today's society, certainly in the province of Ontario, there are a number of statutes, meaning laws, that provide you with rights and responsibilities to complain. Look at the Workplace Harassment and Violence Act, okay? But if you're using that and leveraging that, you have a responsibility to tell and share that concern with your manager. If she or he turns around and fires you, you have a real case of wrongful and constructive dismissal, or maybe a case of wrongful dismissal. Then you see a lawyer and go from there. That is the worst case scenario. But yes, it does happen in some organizations, and you have to decide, is it worth me focusing on this, challenging it, maybe helping my manager become, or team lead, a better manager or leader, or is it better just to acquiesce or just leave? Those are choices you have to make, or whether or not you go to HR.
Pierre, you had a question from somebody who is an actual leader. Emmy is asking, as a leader, how can I emphasize the difference of KPO and KPI to get results?
How can I emphasize it? KPI and KPOs. Okay. So KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator, which is essentially aligned to some kind of goal or objective. And the Key Performance Indicator is simply a measure of success with an actual target that's tangible, if it can be tangible, by a certain date. Okay. So KPIs are really measures. And frankly, there's different forms of measures. One is called OKR, which stands for Objectives and Key Results. OKRs have been around for a long time, but a lot of organizations still focus on SMART goals, which are okay, but they don't necessarily get to the KPOs, which I'll explain in a minute, and linking the KPI to the KPO. We have worked with large organizations that are run on KPIs. They have no strategy. And I go in and say, what the hell? What the hell are you doing? You're running this organization on KPIs that are operational, not strategic. So you need to come up with goals and objectives that will help you grow your business and sustain it. So let's fix the KPOs, which are key performance objectives, and therefore the KPIs. So KPI or KPO is a key performance objective. Another way of saying, okay, what's our goal for our team or ourselves? So there's a distinction. One is where I want to go and what I want to achieve. And the other one, what is the measure of success over a period of time? Okay. So again, it's a measure, and there's a target, and there's a due date. Okay. So those are the two differences. And organizations still today screw that up, even people in HR. So when we see that, we confront it and say, you're doing the wrong thing, because KPIs are not in isolation of a key performance indicator or objective or some form of objective. You're asking them perhaps to do things that are irrelevant, and maybe you're using the wrong measure. You may be using measure A as opposed to using measure C. And if you're using the wrong measures, guess what? People are demotivated, and oftentimes don't achieve the results. I don't know if I've answered that question, okay? But put in the chat bar again if you need to expand on that question, and I'll answer it. Another question from another individual: as a leader, okay, so I've just addressed that, KPO and KPI. I spend days and weeks, months, years helping organizations and leaders get clear on what strategy is, get clear on what success is, and then what's the execution strategy? Okay, what do you need to do? But oftentimes they're so focused on the to-do things, working in the day-to-day business. They forget about taking on good leadership and management skills to motivate their team. So it's one thing to be clear on where you want to go and what you want to achieve, but it's the how, okay? And this is what the Emerging Leaders Program is all about, is helping emerging leaders, okay, to develop that skill set, that knowledge, that insight to actually perform to their best in certain scenarios, and what to do in other scenarios where it isn't an environment that is perfect for you, okay? Okay, any other questions from anyone else? Anything that I've missed? Okay, I see another question here. Lisa, tell me when I'm running out of time, please. This question says, what about if the leadership takes any tangible evidence, spin the story around, and use it to tell more untrue stories about you? Well, is this Russia and Putin, the spin master? Sorry for that comment. So they are better and more convincing with their story as they are in a leadership position. Even though others know about the situation, they do not say anything. What is the best way to deal with this? Again, you know, organizations, individuals, you know, who are threatened will behave in unique, sometimes inappropriate ways. And they will see the individual or individuals as those people hurting them. So they will go around those individuals and, for the most part, either confront the individual and help work with them, or the opposite. They'll create a scenario where those people are unsuccessful and they are fired or those individuals quit. That doesn't help. I mean, a person wrote, one thing you could do is quit and tell them why they are leaving, or human resources why they are leaving. Oftentimes, that doesn't really help because it's not real time. And there's no way of getting you back. So my concern is a lot of organizations aren't listening to employees the way they should. And they're not looking for indicators that tell them that a leader or a manager is not performing well. So there are a ton of indicators out there that relate to that. Lack of productivity, results aren't being achieved, sickness days increasing, people taking all their vacation days. There are a ton of things that organizations could look at to see what's the correlation between how the employees are responding to issues in relationship to some extent their manager. And so when there's strong evidence around that, guess what? There's a yellow light that goes on where that person's boss sees that, or maybe the head of HR, or maybe even the CEO. They will tune in over time. But I still stress your role as an employee, as a worker, is if you feel comfortable enough, speak to that individual and express your concern in tangible ways, if you can, by giving direct examples. And if not, then what I would suggest you do is note the occurrences, the date, the time, what happened, how that made you feel, and whether or not there were witnesses, and keep account of that. And even if you do go talk to your manager or team lead about it and they refute it, or they come up with their own story, it's highly likely they didn't document it. That's, I've spent years helping other executives and managers work through performance. And if those managers are not recording those performance incidents, then they don't have a leg to stand on. At the end of the day, anybody can fire anybody. But if it's for the wrong reason, they still have to pay out, okay? So I would suggest build your case, go directly to the person if you can. If you don't feel comfortable or you're not able to do that, then go to HR. If there's no one in HR, go above that person's head. And I'm speaking from direct experience where I've learned this and did this for years and years and years. So if you have another question and want to ask a question around that, feel free to email me. There's another question. I think the big problem we are getting at here is the iron law of institutions. Well, those are big words. You must be an engineer, where people care more about their position in the institution rather than the institution itself. So they honestly don't care if workers aren't working. They just want to be comfy. It's unfortunate that you feel that way. It's really unfortunate. I don't necessarily see all organizations, or even the majority of the organizations, considered the iron law of institutions. I see that in some institutions that are public sector based or not for profit. But I rarely see that in for-profit organizations, because at the end of the day, if the organization isn't performing or the people aren't performing in their roles, things change. At the end of the day, the shareholders, the board of directors, or the CEO or owner is looking at what are the results. And so change occurs more quickly around the problems that are coming up. It's like what's below the waterline, like the Titanic experience. You don't see what's boiling below the waterline until there's an explosion of some sort. So some people are just on the treadmill and they don't care. Absolutely. I've seen that, I've witnessed it, and I've been fortunate enough to help facilitate those people leaving. However, I have worked with lots of great leaders and great managers in both the private sector and the public sector, and they do care about their employees. Give you an example. I've worked with a very notable public sector organization. It's actually not for profit. And the CEO, who's been in the role for 4 years, has been driving significant change inside that organization. And this CEO felt that because some new members came in to the organization during the pandemic, that they weren't necessarily in sync with some of the other employees or employees who've had more tenure. So what she did was she created an environment where I could, or my team could come in and create a team charter around what is the team charter for the team in terms of what are their mutual goals, what are their mutual values, what are the expected behaviors, and what to do if that person or persons are not complying with those expected behaviors, and what to do in the event of, which is really a short path to the person who heads the team to have a conversation around this occurrence. So team charters work very well, but you can't get to that unless the manager above or the team itself say it's important enough to do. Okay. It says 1 minute.
Hi,
Okay.
Pierre. This is Lisa. Just raised my hand to give you an indicator on the time.
Thank you. So everyone, please feel free to send me an email at plabelle@results.com, rzultz.com. The website rzultz is temporarily down. We had some cyber security issues, so we've just put our website down. So just in the interim anyway, so just send me an email and I'll be happy to answer any questions, or you can contact OSPI as well. Anyway, thank you everyone. Have a great day, a good life. Continue doing the great work that you do. And, you know, if we can be of guidance in terms of coaching or support or just answering any questions for you to get better at coaching or mentoring or managing, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you, everyone.